The process begins by creating a set of range images using a scanning method called optical triangulation. Here we see one scan in progress. On the left, the Buddha statuette translates through a sheet of laser light. On the right, we see the reflected light recorded by a video camera. By analyzing the video frames, we can extract the shape of the object as seen from one side. This statuette was painted matte gray to simplify scanning. The result range data takes the form of a grid of depth samples known as a range image. We can visualize the range image as a set of points in 3 dimensions. By connecting neighboring points, we can easily create a triangle mesh. After estimating surface normals, we can visualize the mesh as a shaded rendering. The acquired range image is actually very dense, roughly 500 by 500 samples, as shown here by a high-resolution rendering of the range surface. Once we have acquired a number of range images, we align and then merge them together. Each green surface on the right represents the range image acquired for one orientation. We convert this surface into a signed distance function sampled on a volumetric grid. We merge this volume into a single volume representing the accumulated object. The gray mesh is an isosurface extracted from this accumulated volume. Note that even after merging 16 scans of the object as shown here, more scanning will be necessary to capture the entire shape. Here is a visualization of our volumetric representation. The image on the left shows a slice through the volume at the position indicated by the red plane on the right. The slice on the left contains 3 colors. Black indicates empty space, white indicates the observed surface, and brown indicates regions of the volume we have not seen. By extracting an isosurface along the white contours, we produce a polygon mesh representing everything we saw. However, this mesh might have holes in it, corresponding to places where the laser did not reach the object. By extracting additional isosurfaces at the frontier between empty and unseen, that is, between black and brown, we fill these holes. The resulting mesh, if not correct, is at least plausible, and it is now watertight. Finally, some comparisons. On the left, a video recording of the original Buddha statuette before painting. It stands 20 centimeters tall. In the middle, a rendering of the reconstructed computer model. We built the model by merging 70 scans. The volumetric grid contained 1,000 voxels on a side, making each voxel 1/4 millimeter. The resulting isosurface contains 2.6 million triangles. We constructed a lower resolution estimated version of the surface to create the rendering shown here. Finally, because the reconstructed surface is watertight, we are able to build a physical replica of the statuette using a layered manufacturing technology called stereolithography. On the right, we see a video recording of the 3D hard copy.
This videotape shows a method for fitting smooth surfaces to dense polygon meshes. The first step in this process is to draw patch boundary lines on the dense polygon mesh. For many applications, this is an essential and non-automatable part of the creative process. Here, we have outlined half of this wolf's head patch by painting on the original polygon mesh. Some of the patch boundaries are white. The animator has chosen these to be stitched with C0 instead of C1 continuity. The next step is finding a parameterization for each patch. The dense polygon mesh initially has no parameterization. It is an irregular mesh. Parameterization is accomplished by an automatic coarse-to-fine resampling strategy. We use this strategy for 2 reasons. First, to improve speed of fit, and second, to improve its robustness. At each subdivision level, we minimize a number of energy measures of the spring mesh. It is to this spring mesh that a B-spline surface will then be fit. The error will later be represented as a displacement map. As can be seen, this process is fast enough to be used in an interactive system. Here now, we see the isocurves of the B-spline fit. And here, we see the B-spline surfaces smooth shaded. On the left is the original polygon mesh. Our next example is an armadillo. 350,000 polygons, 104 patches. Here is the final gridded resampling of patches. Each spring grid is displayed as a quad mesh. As can be seen, even the more distorted patch shapes yield fairly good parameterizations. This attests to the success of our energy minimization schemes. We now see the isocurves of the fitted B-spline surfaces and the corresponding smooth shaded surfaces. Let us focus on just a single patch on the armadillo's leg. Once again, we see the automatic coarse-to-fine gridding of the patch. While the B-spline fit captures the coarse geometry, fine surface detail is represented in a displacement map image. The image representation can be manipulated by standard image processing tools for interesting effects. For example, scaling this displacement map enhances just the bumps and creases on the leg. Here, we use a coarse B-spline surface and a complex displacement map. This trade-off enables us to give the armadillo an armor-plated knee using simple 2D painting operation. In our final displacement map effect, an image with some text is composited with the displacement image. The result is an embossed effect of the lettering on the armadillo's back. These imaging games demonstrate the flexibility of our hybrid representation.
We present several novel, immersive virtual environment interaction techniques based upon body-relative interaction. Interaction relative to one's body provides a real-world frame to operate, gives a more direct and precise sense of control during manipulation, and facilitates richer forms of interaction through gestural actions. We begin by demonstrating how the user can quickly and easily access virtual objects that have been placed relative to his body. Menus and control panels, for example, can be hidden above the user's current field of view. To access them, the user simply reaches up, grabs, and pulls them into view. Different objects can be stored in different locations relative to the user's body. Reaching up and to his left, the user acquires a palette of handheld widgets. Up and to the right, he pulls down a set of two-dimensional control panels. Since objects are stored relative to the user's body, they move with him as he moves the virtual world. Because of proprioception, it is easy for the user to remember and access an object's location. He doesn't have to look at an object in order to interact with it. Once finished with a particular tool, the user can quickly get rid of it with over-the-shoulder deletion. The last deleted object can quickly be reacquired. The user simply reaches behind his back and pulls it into view. In occlusion selection, currently selected object is the object which visually lies behind the crosshair's cursor etched to the user's hand. Here we show how automatic scaling of the world based on object distance can be used to bring instantly within reach objects that are currently outside of the reach of the user. Once the user selected an object, he can grab it by pressing the trigger button on his input device. Each time he presses the button to grab an object, the world is instantly scaled down to bring the object within reach. If we move from a first-person to a third-person point of view, we see that the world is indeed scaling down and back up again each time the user grabs and releases an object. Moving to the side, we can more clearly see the abrupt change in scale of the world. Note that the further away an object lies from the user, the more the world must be scaled down to bring it within reach. The advantage of scaled world grab is that the user can move objects attached to his hand even though they are initially beyond his current reach. This means he can have a better understanding of the object position and orientation due to proprioception, and since the world is scaled down, he can take advantage of stereopsis and head motion parallax. Because of the ambiguity of perspective projections and the fact that we are scaling the world about the user's head, there is no change in the projected image in the head-mounted display, as seen in the first-person point of view. If the user grabs the world instead of grabbing a particular object, scaled world grab can be used as a means of quickly moving through the environment. The user can move to the most remote location in a single grab. Viewing the user from the third-person point of view, we can again see the automatic scaling of the world. If the user holds his hand in front of his face as he turns his head, he can orbit objects in a manner that is similar to Chung's orbital mode. Here we show a head-based technique for quickly zooming between two views of an object. The user begins framing a region of interest using a two-dimensional screen-aligned rectangle in front of his head. To trend between the two views, the user simply leans forward and back. Lean forward to see the object close up, lean backward to return to his original view. Note that to minimize user work, the zoom factor could be set automatically based on the selected object instead of interactively by the user. If the user is to remain in any one view, he can simply step forward or backward through the mnemonic rectangle left floating in space.
This outside view of a patient's colon was reconstructed from the patient's CT scan and rendered offline. Virtual colonoscopy is a new medical procedure for examining the inside of the colon to detect polyps by using 3D CT data and computer graphics. We present here a new interactive technique called interactive virtual colonoscopy. Here we show our interactive virtual colonoscopy system recorded in real time with a camcorder. The center window shows the endoscopic view. Using a physically based camera model and a hardware-assisted visibility mechanism, a physician can interactively navigate in the huge data set of the patient's virtual colon. When the physician clicks the mouse in the endoscopic view, a force is applied to the camera along the direction from the camera to the click point. This force translates and rotates the camera, guiding the physician to a region of interest. With continuous clicking, the camera can freely cruise inside the colon. Now the user is approaching an abnormality which seems to be a small polyp on the surface. A main feature of this system is that it supports real-time collision avoidance. The camera is hampered from moving across the colonic surface by the strong potential barrier defined along the surface. This functionality prevents the physician from getting lost. If desired, the user can show the center line, which is the skeleton of the colon. The right window is the scout panel, which shows the current camera location and orientation on the entire colon image. The left window is the slice panel, which displays the current sagittal, coronal, and transverse slices with the current location and orientation of the camera. These windows are very helpful for the user's orientation. To maximize the rendering speed of our system, we opted to update the scout panel and the slice panel only when the virtual camera is stopped. Another important feature of our virtual colonoscopy is that the user can define the potential field which guides the camera to the target point. With this potential field, the camera automatically cruises towards the target. Of course, the user can apply an external force during this automatic cruise. By default, the camera turns towards its traveling direction. However, this mode can also be turned off. The scout panel not only shows the current location and orientation of the camera, but also shows markers for points of interest for later re-examinations. Now, by clicking on a marker on the scout panel, the user has moved to a location where a large polyp was found earlier. Unlike optical colonoscopy, it is possible to visualize the interior of a polyp using volume rendering. Here we show a volume rendering magically over the endoscopic view. Furthermore, it is possible to rapidly measure the polyp. Here the polyp size is 7.3 by 4.6 millimeters. In addition to the advantages we have cited, virtual colonoscopy is cost-effective, non-invasive, and a patient comfort procedure. It provides an alternative for mass screening of patients for possible colon cancer.
Conveying mood and emotion with lighting is a difficult task in computer graphics. The selection, placement, and manipulation of virtual lights is harder in many ways than it is for real lights. A design gallery interface facilitates the setting of light parameters by allowing the user to browse an automatically generated database of several hundred complementary images of the same scene, each produced by a different light. The image database is organized as a navigable hierarchy in which ancestors are representative of their descendants. When lights are moved to the palette, they are combined with the lights already there. Pop-up sliders allow the user to change the intensity and warmth of selected lights interactively. The design gallery interface does not require the end user to know much about lighting or image rendering to navigate or manipulate in 3 dimensions, or to wait for new images to be rendered. Nevertheless, an experienced user can still find lights in the computer-generated selection to play the traditional cinematographic roles of key, fill, and backlights, for example. Light specification and placement for image-based rendering is also possible in a design gallery framework. Using a geometric model extracted semi-automatically from 3 photographs, this real-world scene can be re-illuminated by combinations of automatically generated virtual lights. This design gallery uses a different interface idea to present volume-rendered images of the same dataset that have been rendered with complementary opacity transfer functions. Thumbnails of the different images are positioned in the center panel so that perceptually similar images lie near each other. Panning and zooming allow the user to navigate the display. Selecting a thumbnail brings up a full-size image, which can then be moved to the surrounding gallery. Mousing on an image in the gallery highlights its associated thumbnail. For this design gallery, both the opacity and color transfer functions are varied automatically to create visualizations of the electron density of a protein molecule. Plots of the associated transfer functions show how image and data relate quantitatively. The 2D double pendulum is a simple but rich dynamic system. Small changes in joint actuation can produce very different trajectories, making it difficult to set and tune parameters manually to achieve a desired motion. In this design gallery, we see some examples of a set of behaviors that can be generated automatically for this physical system. Extending our approach to useful animation scenarios is a current research challenge. Here we show the design gallery concept applied to a physically simulated 3D articulated figure. The control parameters of Hopper Dog are sampled within user-specified ranges to achieve subtle variations on a hopping gait. Although of restricted scope, the motions span a range of emotional tones. Here we see a design gallery for particle systems. For the following animations, the animator fixed some of the control parameters, such as the particle's origin, initial average direction, and color. The computer was free to vary 13 of the 4 possible parameters to generate these variations. Much of the evident variation is achieved by varying the parameters relating to the particle's interaction with the shield of the UFO. Discovering the relative utility of these parameters was an automatic consequence of the design gallery approach.
The idea of this paper is to find ways to transform a non-diffuse lighting solution into a form which is suitable for rapid display using standard graphics API. Here we have a small room lit by 2 halogen torchieres. The lighting has been pre-computed using a global illumination algorithm. The diffuse part of its appearance can be easily displayed using Gaussian triangles as shown. But how can we quickly display the non-diffuse or view-dependent aspects of its appearance? Our approach is to fit each non-diffuse object with a set of virtual lights that use a simple lighting model such as OpenGL's. These lights are chosen to approximately reproduce the appearance that was computed by the global illumination algorithm. In this example, each non-diffuse object has been fit with 8 directional virtual lights, which are shown as arrows. Each light affects only its own object and does not cast shadows. Here we show the accuracy of our fits. On the left is the teapot from our room as computed by the Monte Carlo global illumination algorithm, and on the right is its approximation using 8 virtual lights. As you can see, the approximation captures most, though not all, of the original's features. Here we see the same comparison for the chair object from our room. Next, we see a walkthrough of our room, which was recorded live on an SGI Onyx 2 Infinite Reality engine at better than 30 frames per second. By taking the non-diffuse lighting solution and approximating it using virtual lights, we have gained several benefits. The primary one is that by encoding the appearance using the native interface to the graphics display system, in this case OpenGL, we can take advantage of its highly optimized software and hardware for rapid display. An additional benefit is that it stores the non-diffuse information in a very compact form that greatly reduces the solution size. We have achieved these benefits by using OpenGL's lighting model in a somewhat unusual way. Rather than thinking of it as a way to compute lighting, we think of it as a set of basis functions for reproducing appearance.
The goal of our algorithm is to achieve rapid hierarchical illumination updates in dynamic environments. To do this, we augment the standard hierarchical radiosity link structure. In particular, we store subdivided links, which we call passive links, and we augment both passive and normal energy links with the shaft structure shown in the image. Green shafts correspond to energy links, and blue shafts correspond to passive links. In this example, the chair is the dynamic object. By descending only into the passive links that touch the dynamic object, we rapidly find the energy links affected. Notice that other energy links coexist on the finest elements. We only consider the children of the original passive link. The basic algorithm is shown in this example. Using the line space hierarchy, that is, the hierarchy of links and shafts, we quickly identify the links modified and are able to update the radiosity very rapidly. For this scene of more than 5,000 initial polygons, we achieve update rates of about 4 frames per second. To completely recompute illumination at each frame would require 9 seconds for each new position of the object. In this segment, we show the links affected by the moving object. In yellow, we show the links checked for change and potentially updated. In red, we show the links which were candidates for refinement. We next show in red the parts of the hierarchy which are affected by the move. Thus, the push-pull step is only performed on these parts of the hierarchy. This segment shows a larger scene containing almost 15,000 polygons. We see that update rates of about 4 frames per second are achievable using our approach. Computing the initial solution required 21 seconds. We can also apply our algorithm to scenes mainly illuminated by global or secondary illumination. In this case, additional bounces are formed. In the example shown here, we achieve about half a frame per second for a scene where most illumination is due to indirect lighting. Finally, we show a higher quality solution for which update rates are slightly slower. We have developed a frame control mechanism which permits us to adapt quality based on user requirements. We restrict the number of updates the algorithm is allowed to perform per frame and cut off the descent into line space when we have used up our available time. This results in local simplification around the region of movement but higher frame rates. We show two examples where the frame rate doubles when we halve the updates authorized per frame.
Visibility culling with hierarchical occlusion maps. In this video, we demonstrate a new visibility culling algorithm based on occlusion maps. First, we show a simple rotating object. On the right side of the screen is the occlusion map hierarchy, with the highest resolution map at the bottom and the lowest resolution map at the top. An occlusion map records the average opacity of blocks of pixels in a rendered image. We now show the culling algorithm in action. A viewer sees a house and some trees. As the viewer moves, the trees may combine to occlude the house. The projection of the house is surrounded by a bounding rectangle. We render this rectangle in yellow when the house is visible, and red when it is occluded. We also show a bird's eye view of the scene in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, with the viewer's view frustum in green. The visibility test is decomposed into an overlap test and a depth test. In this case, for the house to be occluded, its bounding rectangle must lie within the opaque portion of the occlusion maps, and the house must be beyond the trees. One of the databases to which our algorithm has been applied is a city model composed of more than 300,000 polygons. The algorithm dynamically selects a small set of occluders. We show the hierarchy of occlusion maps being constructed in real time on the right. They reflect the silhouette of nearby buildings. In this segment, we rendered the bounding rectangles of visible objects in yellow and occluded objects in red. A large number of red rectangles on the screen implies a high rate of occlusion culling. Next, we see two recordings of a walkthrough of the city streets. The sequence on the right uses occlusion culling in addition to view frustum culling. The algorithm achieves considerable speedup. From many viewpoints, speedup is by a factor of 5. The algorithm is easily applicable to dynamic environments. This environment has thousands of dinosaurs and teapots moving randomly. When we turn on occlusion culling, the algorithm combines most of the objects near the viewpoint into an occlusion map, which hides most of the other objects. An additional feature of the algorithm is its ability to perform approximate culling. The algorithm performs this approximation by varying a parameter called the opacity threshold, displayed on the right side of the screen.
Its default value is 1.
When this value is decreased, our visibility solution becomes coarser. This means the algorithm also culls away objects visible only through small holes in the occlusion map. Next, we show a split-screen comparison in this environment, with view frustum culling only on the left, but both view frustum and occlusion culling on the right. We have also applied our algorithm to the walkthrough of real-world CAD models. Here is the auxiliary machine room of a submarine, roughly 750,000 polygons. The model is full of complex piping and irregularly shaped objects. Many directions have low depth complexity. Most of the objects are tessellated into small polygons, such that no one polygon will serve as a good occluder. Once again, we rendered bounding rectangles of objects in the scene, yellow if they are rendered, or red if they are culled. For a real-world model such as this, the right-hand window shows the obtained by our algorithm. The algorithm is selecting occluders using criteria which combine the size of occluders and their distance from the viewpoint. In this video, we have demonstrated a visibility culling algorithm using hierarchical occlusion maps. Benefiting from its ability to fuse occluders in real time, we have shown a significant speedup in several different types of environments.
In this video, we are interested in visibility queries such as the computation of vertex-to-polygon views or limits of umbra and penumbra caused by a polygonal light source. Our work is based on the characterization of the topological changes of visibility. For example here, the polygon seen behind the highlighted vertex changes as we move. This change occurs when the vertex and the edge are aligned from the viewpoint. The locus of such changes is defined by the set of lines going through the vertex and the edge. This is a one-dimensional set of lines and can be parameterized, for example, by the intercept on the edge. We call it a critical line swath. We refer to it as an EV line swath, indicating the edge-vertex pair. Now consider the extremities of such a 1D set. Here we have two vertices aligned. There is only one line through 2 points. There are 0 degrees of freedom. It is a zero-dimensional set. In the upper left, we show the adjacencies between the critical line swath and the extremal stabbing lines. At the other extremity of the swath, we have a vertex aligned with 2 edges. These are the 2 examples of extremal stabbing lines, a VV and a VE. Consider this extremal stabbing line. There is another critical line swath emanating from it, involving the same edge and vertex, but with a different polygon behind. Yet another EV swath. Here we have 3 edges aligned, resulting in a topological change in visibility. An extremal stabbing line can be seen at the node of a graph, and the critical line swaths are its arcs. For each kind of node, we define the catalog of adjacent arcs. Each node or arc is characterized by the polygons at its extremities. This polygon can be null if the extremity is at infinity. The arcs of our graph are stored in a 2-dimensional array indexed by the polygons at the extremities. This array allows for efficient queries. We call the graph of critical line swaths and extremal stabbing lines, together with this array, the visibility skeleton. For this scene of 1000 polygons, the construction of the skeleton takes a quarter of an hour. We then can compute vertex-to-polygon views. And face-to-face discontinuity meshes. Note that this recording was performed in real time.
"3D line integral convolution can be used to generate a single solid texture that conveys specific information about the shapes of all of the iso-level surfaces in a volume dataset." Here we see the sequence more slowly. At every instant in time, the visible strokes be locally aligned with the direction of the greatest normal curvature across the specific level surface that is being displayed. Under ordinary circumstances, it can often be difficult to adequately perceive the three-dimensional shape of a layered transparent surface, or to accurately judge its depth distance from underlying opaque structures. A sparse texture of evenly distributed strokes that follows the intuitive flow of the surface shape can provide valuable cues to both the shape and depth of the external transparent layer, without unduly compromising the visibility of the inner object. The effectiveness of the texture will be improved if the length of each stroke is locally adjusted according to the magnitude of the principal curvature to reflect the perceptual importance of the particular direction it indicates. If the texture is generated at multiple resolutions, the stroke widths can be easily varied at the time of rendering to reflect information about the shading of the surface or any other dynamically changing function over the volume.
This video demonstrates our recent work on view-dependent refinement of progressive meshes. The general problem that we address is that of adapting the complexity of geometric models at runtime. The previously introduced progressive mesh representation defines for a given mesh a continuous sequence of approximations. These approximations can be rapidly traversed at runtime for efficient level of detail control. These sequences of LOD models are appropriate for many applications, but difficulties arise with large-scale models such as this terrain. As seen as bird's eye view, many faces of the mesh lie outside the view frustum and do not contribute to the image, yet these faces require some processing. More importantly, the terrain is rendered at the same resolution everywhere. Ideally, the mesh should be selectively refined in a view-dependent way. Most of the previous work on view-dependent refinement addressed the cases of height fields and parametric surface tessellations. Like the recent work by Xia and Varshni, generalized these ideas to work for arbitrary meshes. In this work, we create a framework for real-time selective refinement of arbitrary progressive meshes. We develop efficient view-dependent refinement criteria and use these in an incremental algorithm to adapt the mesh at runtime. We define 3 view-dependent refinement criteria. First, we demonstrate selective refinement based solely on the view frustum. The basic idea is to coarsen the mesh outside the view frustum in order to reduce load on the graphic system. In this wide-angle view, the real view frustum is shown as the yellow rectangle. Because there are few dependencies in our refinement framework, the mesh quickly adapts between full detail and coarse approximation at the frustum boundary. As the criterion is conservative, it is guaranteed not to affect the view with frustum. In this sequence, we see the regular view on the left and a bird's eye view on the right. All examples on this videotape are recorded in real time. We next add to the view frustum criterion a screen space geometric error tolerance. We measure surface deviation with respect to the original model and incrementally refine or coarsen the mesh based on the magnitude of that deviation when projected in screen space. Because the refinement operations stem from a carefully optimized sequence, the resulting approximations quickly recover the original geometry, more so than in quad tree-like schemes. Currently, the screen space error tolerance is set to 1 pixel. Here is what happens to the mesh as we modify this tolerance. Our surface deviation metric includes both a uniform and a directional component. Therefore, in this rotating sphere, more refinement naturally occurs near the silhouette where the surface deviation is orthogonal to the view direction. Our third refinement criterion is surface orientation. Its purpose is to coarsen regions of the mesh oriented away from the viewer. In this example, we use the progressive mesh representation of a NURBS tessellation, of course the Utah teapot. What can only be seen from the top view is that the back-facing region of the mesh is kept quite coarse. This helps to further reduce graphics load. Although our scheme is most conveniently illustrated using simple surfaces, the fully detailed mesh may be arbitrary, as demonstrated here. Within our framework, it's possible to create smooth visual transitions, or geomorphs, between any 2 selectively refined meshes. The final demo is a real-time flight over the Grand Canyon. Here, the fully detailed mesh has 400,000 faces. It has been pre-simplified from an original mesh of over 700,000 faces. A simple controller adjusts the screen space tolerance from frame to frame so as to maintain approximately 9,000 active faces. Previous demos ran on an Indigo 2 Extreme. This one runs on an Impact for improved texture mapping performance. For fast rendering, we use a greedy algorithm to efficiently generate triangle strips at every frame.
Hierarchical Dynamic Simplification, or HDS, is a framework for the dynamic view-dependent simplification of arbitrary polygonal environments. It was designed to allow real-time visualization of models with thousands of parts and hundreds of thousands of polygons. HDS simplifies scenes using vertex collapsing. Here is a simple 2D example. A root node encloses every vertex in the scene. The root node is divided into 4 subnodes, which in turn are divided into 4 leaf nodes. Here the representative vertex of each subnode is circled. Every vertex in the highlighted subnode is collapsed to the representative vertex. As vertices are collapsed together, triangles become degenerate and are filtered out. Collapsing all subnodes reduces this scene from 4 polygons to 1. Here are a series of vertex collapse operations applied to a complete model at successive levels of the tree. Nodes in the vertex tree store the information necessary to efficiently collapse vertices. A node's tries are those triangles with exactly 1 vertex in the node. These triangles must be updated when a node is collapsed or expanded. A node's subtries are those triangles with 2 or 3 corners and different children of the node. These are the triangles which disappear when the node is collapsed and reappear when the node is expanded. Note that the large orange triangle is a subtrie of the root node. The torpedo room model contains about 700,000 triangles and was acquired as an unorganized list of polygons. This fly-through was recorded in real time on a Silicon Graphics reality engine using the HDS system. Nodes collapsed or expanded dynamically based on a user-specified screen space error tolerance. Adjusting this tolerance allows the user to interactively trade off fidelity and performance. Simplification and rendering are asynchronous. If the viewpoint changes quickly, the simplification process can fall behind without slowing the rendering process. When the viewpoint stops moving, the scene will sweeten as the simplification catches up. This model of the auxiliary machine room of a submarine contains almost 3,000 objects composed of over 500,000 triangles.
This video demonstrates the progressive simplicial complex representation. Complex geometric models are common in computer graphics. For instance, this highly detailed mesh from Viewpoint Data Labs has approximately 168,000 triangle faces. The progressive mesh representation, introduced last year, provides a nice multi-resolution framework for storing, transmitting, and rendering such meshes. For a given model, it defines a continuous sequence of approximations, which can be rapidly traversed at runtime. However, Progressive Mesh Framework has 2 key restrictions. First, it supports only meshes, in other words, orientable 2-dimensional manifolds. Models that cannot be represented include 1-dimensional manifolds, non-orientable manifolds, non-manifolds, and models of mixed dimensionality. Second, the PM representation restricts all meshes in the multi-resolution sequence to have the same topological type. This imposes constraints on the complexity of the base mesh. For example, a genus 0 surface cannot be simplified to fewer than 4 faces. As the genus of the model increases, so does the lower bound on the complexity of the base mesh. Most importantly, each component must appear in simplified form in the base mesh. This model has 117 components, forcing the base mesh to have 2,522 faces. Often the geometry deteriorates near this topological lower bound. Some existing model simplification methods use the concept vertex unification to allow the topology to simplify. In this work, we use that concept to generalize progressive meshes to allow topological changes. The new representation, progressive simplicial complexes, is able to capture arbitrary triangulated models, and it does so by progressively encoding both the geometry and topology of the model in a unified framework. In the PSC representation, an arbitrary triangulated model is simplified by successively unifying pairs of vertices. The paper describes an optimization algorithm for selecting these unifications. As in previous vertex unification methods, triangles may be reduced into edges and edges into vertices. In the end, all that is left is a single vertex. The key element in our representation is the encoding of the sequence of inverse transformations, called generalized vertex splits, that allow progressive reconstruction of the model. For improved fidelity, we render isolated vertices and edges as spheres and cylinders. Their radii are determined by associating areas with the simplices and tracking these areas through simplification. Here's an even more complex example. The original mesh had over 230,000 faces. This example compares the PM representation left with the PSC representation on the right for the same number of vertices. At this point, the PM base mesh on the left can no longer be simplified, and by now it looks rather poor. In contrast, the PSC model still looks acceptable and can be simplified further. This sequence of models can of course be used for runtime level of detail control. As in progressive meshes, smooth visual transitions, or geomorphs, can be constructed between any pair of models in the sequence. Here we show 8 consecutive geomorphs. This example shows the PSC representation of a non-manifold network of curves. The PSC representation also extends to higher dimensional models. In particular, we expect it to be of use in volume rendering. To summarize, we have introduced a continuous resolution representation for arbitrary triangulated models, which progressively encodes both geometry and topology. The representation has practical applications in storage, transmission, and rendering of geometric models.
Welcome to the Tour into the Picture tip. The first part of this video shows how to make animation from a single picture or photograph using the tip animation system. First, we start with digitizing a 2D picture. Next, we specify the foreground objects and obtain the background image by retouching the foreground. Then we make masking information from the foreground objects as a 2D image of grayscale values. Now we use a spidery mesh for modeling a 3D scene. After the vanishing point is specified as the point emitting the radial lines, 5 rectangles create the 3D background. The foreground object models are then positioned in the 3D background.
The camera positioning is previewed in a wireframe 3D space or by using lower resolution animated sequences. Now please enjoy the animation examples.
In cell animation, complex camera moves are designed through clever construction of two-dimensional layouts. In this example, a single background painting contains multiple perspectives, including a front view of the tower and the deep perspective looking up at the moon. The scene animates by extracting successive rectangular regions, or camera fields, from the artwork. The artwork and the camera motion are designed by the layout artist. We envision multi-perspective panorama design software being used to aid layout artists in enlarging the range of possible camera motion and assisting in integrating computer-generated imagery into traditional animation. Our prototype explores this. For example, to pan across a city street, the artist first builds a crude 3D model of the scene and pans a 3D camera across it. Our program produces a layout guide for the scene, a picture of the relative positions of various objects in the scene, and camera motion information. In the next step, a layout artist adds the detail and texture that was too costly to be modeled and rendered in a 3D world. Using the layout camera information generated by our multi-perspective panorama software, the 2D camera moves across the background. The resulting animation resembles the original 3D camera path. Slightly more complex, the camera is now tilted as it pans across the city. The software produces a layout with a bend in it, and the 2D camera arcs across the layout. Compare the 3D camera images with the 2D results. This trucking example is nearly a parallel projection, but the layout tapers slightly to the right as the camera moves gently forward. We need multiple planes moving relative to each other to generate parallax. Compare the 3D camera images with the 2D results. We construct a complex example of a camera mounted on an imaginary helicopter flying freely above the city. The layout contains substantial distortions and complexity. The layout artist adds detail to the multi-perspective panorama. The result is multi-perspective camera motion over a far more complex scene than we originally modeled. This rain, like any 3D object, can be rendered and composited into the scene. Notice how the coordinate system in the lower right follows the apparent 2D camera motion. A 2D layout can be made to look three-dimensional by warping the multi-perspective panorama onto the original 3D geometry. To demonstrate 3D integration, let's take our example of panning across a city street and add a 3D element. We render a ball with the original multi-perspective panorama camera motion. The 3D element seamlessly integrates with the panning 2D artwork. The increasing creative demands of the animation industry can be well served by multi-perspective panorama software.
This videotape demonstrates our system for constructing full panoramic mosaics and texture mapping them onto 3D objects. Here's the sequence of 18 images acquired with a photographic camera. We take the first 2 images in this sequence and paste them into the composition area. We can interact to move the image or deform it using affine deformations. Perspective transformations allow us to better register these first 2 frames, but are a little harder to control. Once we have the first 2 images fully aligned, we can invoke the automatic registration algorithm, and then view the resulting misregistration using a blink comparator. Our new 3D rotation mode, described in the paper, makes the interactive placement much more natural. We can move the image in any direction, not just horizontally. If the camera motion is restricted to pure horizontal panning, we can create the panoramic image directly in cylindrical coordinates. First, we manually line the first two images using a pure translation. After this, we can automatically align the remainder of the image sequence without user intervention. The resulting panoramic image can be cropped and written out for later viewing with a panoramic image viewer. To use our 3D rotation mode, we first align several images using the 8-parameter perspective transform. Here the user is interactively aligning the first pair of images. Next, we have the system automatically register a few more images in the sequence. After this has been done, we can automatically estimate the focal length using the algorithm described in the paper. Once the focal length has been estimated, we can then use 3D rotation mode to align the remainder of the images in the sequence. After a complete sequence has been registered, the first and last images may not line up correctly. Notice how the blackboard appears twice in this panorama. After invoking our global alignment or block adjustment technique, the resulting panorama has no overlaps or gaps and is visually seamless. In this part of our videotape, we show texture map models derived from panoramic mosaics being rendered on a personal computer with no hardware acceleration. The first scene is a lobby where we have built a hemispherical panoramic image and texture mapped it onto a cube, just like an environment map. Notice that the registration is good, even when looking straight up. Our second scene is a conference room, which was shot with a handheld consumer digital camera. We took 3 complete passes around the room and stitched them together to get a reasonably wide vertical field of view. Of course, since we are texture mapping onto a regular graphical model, we can also add any 3D graphics that we'd like to this scene. We can also output our panoramic mosaics as cylindrical or spherical images and view these with specialized viewers such as surround video. This panorama was taken by an astronaut aboard the space shuttle using a handheld digital camera. Our software was to stitch the sequence despite moderate amounts of motion parallax. Notice the ghosting that still remains even after the global alignment. Our novel deghosting algorithm was applied to the resulting panorama to reduce double image and blur artifacts. Notice how the region at the back of the chair now has many fewer ghosting artifacts. Our final segment demonstrates our mosaic construction algorithm being applied in real time to a live video sequence. After the diagnostic frame lines are removed, we can see that the final mosaic looks quite seamless.
This video shows interactive 3D Boolean operations between simple solid primitives. On the right, we see the objects that the user interacts with. On the left, we see the object resulting from the Boolean operation. Affine operations are performed on the objects using a direct manipulation device operated by user gestures. The objects on the right are displayed in 2 colors, because when the user selects the Boolean difference operation, we want to visually distinguish between the subtracting and the subtracted object. The result is always red object minus blue object. Initially, we define a hollow cone by taking the difference between 2 solid cones. We now instantiate 2 hollow cones and see their union. And we now see the difference between the two hollow cones. Finally, we see the intersection between the two hollow cones. The intersection has fascinating geometry, which we can inspect by rotating the defining objects and by translating them. In this example, we define cylindrical holes inside a flat block.
Guaranteeing the topology of an implicit surface polygonization for interactive modeling. At SIGGRAPH 94, Wittgen and Heckbert showed how a particle system can interactively manipulate implicit surfaces. The particle system suggests the form of the implicit surface, but lacks occlusion and does not convey any topological connectedness information. We can rotate the implicit surface and get a top view, and we find a configuration of 4 implicit blobbies. These blobbies appear connected. These don't. These appear connected, and these appear connected. We have to depend on appearances only to determine if these blobbies are connected or not, because the particles don't give us enough information about the connectedness of the surface. As before, we can always grab a particle and drag it and have that change the implicit surface parameters. Here we've connected those two, or apparently connected those two. The goal of this paper is to provide a technique for polygonizing the implicit surface by connecting up these particles. Here we can create edges between particles, and we can tell that that section of the particle system is connected. When we fill in the edges with polygons, it becomes crystal clear that we have 4 connected blobbies now. This polygonization is also dynamic, and we can grab any of the vertices, move them around, and have the topology change accordingly. We can guarantee that the topology of the polygonization matches the topology of the implicit surface by examining the critical points of the implicit surface. This version of the program tracks the critical points. This configuration shows all the different kinds of critical points. In black, inside each of the blobbies, we have maximum points, and between each of the maximum points, we have blue-colored 2 saddle points. And there's a saddle point 10, saddle point 9, saddle point 1, and saddle point 3, and saddle point 2. And in between the 2 saddle points, we have a 1 saddle point 7. As we move the blobbies around, these critical points move also, according to the rules of catastrophe theory. They can also collide and annihilate each other. And when a critical value changes sign, goes out from outside to inside the surface, we get a topology change, such as the connection and disconnection we're seeing with critical point 9. Also, some of our trackers go off to Never Never Land, like number 11 there. Moving this blobby closer shows how critical points can be created in pairs. Finding these newly created critical points requires an interval space search. Critical point 18 is a minimum. This version of the program uses a four-dimensional interval search to find critical points in time and space, but only those critical points that pass through the implicit surface boundary. So their function value, the critical value, is 0. These points hardly ever occur, and so it's a very sparse arrangement of points in time and space that we're searching for. Hence, the interval search is almost always empty, which converges quite fast. In the case where a critical value of 0 is detected, we see a small degradation in speed. Here we have a configuration of 4 blobby ellipsoids. In purple we have the separatrices connecting the maximum points at the center of each of the ellipsoids. As we bring these ellipsoids closer together, the critical values of the two saddles in between the maximum points goes positive, and we see a topological connection between the implicit surfaces. We can also see the creation of a one saddle, two saddle pair and its destruction. Now we're left with a torus with a one saddle in the middle. The algorithm correctly repolygonizes this one saddle when its value goes positive. The following example demonstrates a phantom component. We can see that we have two maximums. One maximum at the center of each ellipsoid, a separatrix separating the two, and a two saddle in between. As we move the one ellipsoid closer to the other, we can see the separatrix is starting to become a little chaotic. This is setting up a catastrophe that creates a maximum and another two saddle. As we move the ellipsoid even closer, the critical value of the maximum becomes positive and a blobby appears. Now there are only two key points creating these two ellipsoids, but there are three disconnected components. Two ellipsoids and a third phantom. Such phantom components would be hard or even impossible for other polygonization algorithms to find, but our algorithm finds it because it searches for all the critical points. Finally, we conclude with a teddy bear that we sculpted using these techniques. We can repolygonize the teddy bear and show how our inflation algorithm first starts by creating spheres around the maximum points, and in connecting these spheres, the saddle points between the maximum points goes positive. Thank you very much. The end.
The responsive workbench is a projection-based augmented reality system that displays high-resolution stereoscopic images on a tabletop. We track the user's head position with respect to the table and generate a separate perspective-correct image for each eye. These images are then displayed in sequence, and shutter glasses are used to channel the images to each eye appropriately. We have extended this approach to display independent stereoscopic images for two users. Since each user requires a separate stereo pair, we interleave 4 images sequentially. The images are generated on a 4-processor Onyx 2 with 2 infinite reality graphics pipelines. Each pipeline renders a stereo pair for a single viewer, and custom hardware interleaves the frames to produce a single video stream. We also modified the shutter glasses to work with this 2-user approach. In this simple example, 2 users view a cube. Since both users see stereoscopic images from their own viewpoint, they can examine the cube independently. When the workbench is viewed without shutter glasses, we can see the 4 images that make up the 2-viewer stereo display. Note the large separation between the images for the 2 viewers. Since both users have a perspective-correct view of the scene, they can refer to the same object by simply pointing to it. This is the image the right user would see. This is the image the left user would see. If only the right user is tracked, the left user sees a more and more distorted image as he moves away from the right user, shown here. This distortion can make it difficult for the 2 users to discuss what they see. For this video, we generate a monoscopic image on the workbench for the video camera's point of view. Since the users cannot see a perspective-correct image, they are just acting out the interactions they would normally have. Since both users have their own view of the virtual environment, we could display different information to each user. In this example, 2 users are examining a skeleton model. When one user, who is perhaps a teacher or a doctor, points to a bone, an annotation about that bone appears. This annotation may remind a teacher of facts about the bone or list a doctor's notes about a diagnosis. The simple annotation we use here is for illustrative purposes only. This information does not appear to the other user, who is a student or a patient. Also, since both users have distortion-free views, they can easily pass objects to each other for closer inspection. In this example, building contractors are meeting to discuss the plans for modifications to a building. The contractors see a basic house model, plus an additional information layer specific to their responsibilities. Both see the details of areas where their work may come into conflict. In this case, they are discussing modification to a wall supporting part of the roof above. The first contractor sees walls he must modify, shown in green, and the part of the roof it affects. The second contractor sees the entire roof. The supporting wall being discussed is shown in green. In this example, 2 users are viewing a visualization of the air traffic over the United States. One user is primarily concerned with the traffic in the west and the other in the east. Each user only sees the flights in their half of the country, shown as planes with green trails. Flights that cross the boundary between their halves are shown as planes with blue trails to both users. This makes it easy for them to discuss flights that go between their halves. Here we see the views for both users at once. The view for the western user is shown at the top, and the view for the eastern user is shown at the bottom. Note that the activity in the northeast is only visible to the eastern user. This example shows a production planning prototype in which 2 users collaborate to build a construction schedule. The prototype integrates a 3D CAD model at the back of the table with a schedule for its construction at the front. Users can interactively modify the schedule and immediately see the effect of their changes in the CAD model. We have developed a responsive workbench system that gives 2 users perspective views of a shared space, allowing them to collaboratively interact with the virtual environment. In this video, we have also presented several situations in which giving each user a specialized view of the environment can be useful.
We present a new method for estimating a user's position and orientation using single sensor observations as opposed to groups of observations. We refer to this new approach as single constraint at a time, or SCAT tracking. Consider estimating the position and orientation of a user-mounted camera by observing known features in the environment. A conventional multiple constraint approach would be to observe a group of known scene points that together sufficiently constrain a unique pose estimate. A group of points is necessary because an observation of any single point provides incomplete information. Notice here, for example, that a variety of camera configurations can produce the same image of a feature. However, even though such a single observation provides incomplete information, it can be used to adjust a previous estimate. We represent the current position uncertainty with a 3D probability density as depicted here. In the absence of scene point observations, this uncertainty grows over time. An individual scene point observation can, however, be used to reduce the uncertainty along the direction in space corresponding to that observation. We exploit this notion using a Kalman filter to blend incomplete measurement information in an ongoing fashion. Over time, the Kalman filter recursively refines a position and orientation estimate and updates the uncertainty accordingly. This same idea could be applied to magnetic trackers such as those from Polimus or Ascension, which use the space-in algorithm for tracking. The space-in algorithm involves generating a sequence of 3 variously polarized source excitations along with 3 corresponding sensor measurement vectors. Information from the group of sequential measurements is then used to estimate the sensor's position and orientation. This procedure is repeated for each estimate. A magnetic tracker using the SCAT method would produce a new estimate with each measurement, resulting in 3 times the estimate rate and 1/3 the latency of a space-in implementation. Notice that each measurement is incorporated immediately as it occurs. Consider now what happens when a sensor is moving during a sequence of excitations and measurements. The space-in approach is to try and completely constrain the geometric relationship between the source and the sensor. While this approach is intuitive, it is only valid if the excitations and measurements occur simultaneously, if they are rectified to a single instant in time, or if the sensor is truly stationary. The SCAT method avoids this problem by using the incomplete information from each individual excitation and measurement to adjust the previous estimate. This incremental approach makes no assumptions about the simultaneity of the measurement data. We are all accustomed to employing enough or more than enough constraints to determine a unique solution to a problem. Instead, we advocate letting go of this notion and estimating a solution, a single constraint at a time.
Video rewrite synthesizes video of a person mouthing words they never spoke.
This is video rewrite. My face is Ellen's. My voice is Michelle's. Ellen did not say these words. Michelle did. The lip sync is synthetic. We'll explain how we did this.
Video rewrite builds a database of a person speaking naturally. Then, given new audio, a new video is automatically synthesized of the person speaking new words. Video rewrite does this without manual intervention and without complicated 3D models. We describe the analysis stage first. Video rewrite uses speech recognition and computer vision techniques to analyze the training data.
Changed you be into a flounder in the sea.
It labels the training video with speech segment boundaries, with facial pose, and with lip and chin positions. We use speech recognition to mark the video with phoneme labels. Here are the triphones in the word flounder.
Flounder.
During synthesis, we rearrange these images to match the phonemes of a new utterance. Computer vision techniques track the pose of the subject's head using a 3D planar model. This animation shows the estimated facial plane. In the synthesis stage, we use these estimates to align the rearranged lip images with a background face. Given a small set of labeled images, a computer vision technique called eigenpoints outlines the lips, teeth, and jaw in other images. The lines you see here were marked automatically with eigenpoints. During synthesis, we use these lines to stitch together the rearranged lip images and insert them into the background face. To synthesize a new video, video rewrite starts with a new utterance and synthesizes the correct sequence of lip shapes.
This is video rewrite.
Video rewrite uses a background sequence to set the stage for the new lips. It then inserts the lip sequence into the background image to create a new video.
This is video rewrite.
Speech recognition is used to label the new audio. These speech labels tell us the lip motions we want and in what order they should appear. Lip images are chosen from all over the video database and played back in whatever order is needed. This animation shows the rearranged lip images without any correction for changes in the head position. Since video rewrite rearranges the original lip images, it needs to correct for changes in head pose and mouth shape. Video rewrite uses the head pose estimates to register the lips. To avoid abrupt changes in mouth shape, video rewrite overlaps and blends segments of the training footage. It does this using 2D morphing based on eigenpoint labels around the lips and chin. Finally, video rewrite stitches the combined lip sequence into the background face.
This is video rewrite.
To do this, video rewrite removes the mouth from a sequence of background images and adjusts the jawline to accept the new utterance. It then stitches the new lips into the background to create the final animation.
This is video rewrite.
The results shown here are based on 8 minutes of training data.
Say to him that we wish to have a cottage. All were furnished in the best of everything. There was a teeny hall and a beautiful sitting room. Instead, it was quite green and yellow.
The results shown here are based on 1 minute of training data.
Video rewrite gives lip-synced movies. I never met Forrest Gump. I did not inhale. Read my lips.
Pixel values in most digital images provide only qualitative rather than quantitative measures of the amount of light in the scene. To understand what the pixel values really mean, we need to consider the entire imaging process. First, the incident light, or radiance, is focused by the lens system into an image, creating sensor irradiance. The shutter integrates this irradiance over time to produce film exposure, forming a latent image according to the film response curve. The latent image is developed to produce variations in film density, which is also a nonlinear mapping. The film is then scanned using a CCD array scanner, changing the film densities into voltages. Although CCD arrays respond linearly to light, a nonlinearity appears when the CCD element saturates. The CCD voltages are digitized and then digitally remapped to produce the final digital pixel values. Turning pixel values back into measures of scene radiance requires two things. First, it requires knowing the aggregate response curve of the imaging process. Second, it requires that every part of the scene be imaged in a way that is neither underexposed nor saturated. We have developed a technique for satisfying both requirements by taking several photographs of the scene with different exposure amounts. The response curve can be determined directly by observing the pixel values in the different exposures. In this simple example, 3 pixels are observed in 5 images. If, for a moment, we assume that a particular pixel observed unit radiance, then the pixel's values in the 5 images trace out a part of the film response curve. Here, we see the partial curves traced out by 3 pixels. The horizontal axis is pixel value, the vertical is log exposure. The 3 pixels do not trace out a consistent curve because we assume their radiance values. Changing the assumed radiance value of a pixel has the effect of shifting its section of the response curve up or down. Thus, we can adjust the assumed radiance values until the curves mesh with each other. This not only recovers the radiance values of the pixels, but it reconstructs the response function of the imaging process. In the paper, we show how this can be done in an efficient and robust manner by solving a linear system. The technique can be applied to color images by solving for the red, green, and blue channel response curves separately. This photograph is one of several taken inside a church with a 35mm film camera. The image has both underexposed and saturated regions. In particular, the sun is directly behind the rightmost stained glass window, making it especially bright. In this image, the recovered radiance map has been linearly scaled to the range of the display device. Although the window is now visible, nearly the entire rest of the scene is plunged into darkness. By multiplying the pixel values in the radiance map by a factor of 1,000, the rest of the scene becomes visible. This false color version of the radiance map shows the large range of radiance in the scene, with a brightest to darkest ratio of 300,000. Several techniques exist to convert radiance maps to images that can be displayed on normal display devices. Here, a technique developed by Ward, Rushmeyer, and Piatko displays full dynamic range using a histogram compression technique. Another algorithm simulates artifacts of the human visual system, such as poor color and contrast sensitivity in dark areas and glare in the bright areas. Radiance maps are the representation to use for image processing operations. If we apply motion blur to the church image using the pixel values from an original digitized photograph, clipped values in the bright regions are averaged with darker pixels to produce unsaturated blurred regions. If we further the radiance map and then virtually rephotograph the map with the recovered film response curve, pixel values are not clipped until after the very bright values have smeared across the image, leaving well-defined window trails. This last image is an actual photograph, with real motion blur produced by rotating the camera on the tripod during the exposure. The result is consistent with the blurred radiance map. In summary, we have presented a simple and robust technique for obtaining linear response, high dynamic range radiance maps with conventional imaging equipment, and we have demonstrated some of the reasons why radiance maps are far more useful to the practitioner of computer graphics than regular digitized images.
We present a system for creating pen and ink drawings from grayscale images in which the user controls the orientation of pen strokes using a painting style interface. We represent images with 3 components: the tone or darkness, the texture, and the orientation. We create an illustration by combining these components, and by rescaling them before combining, we can produce the same illustration at different sizes. The user can edit the various components of an illustration using our editor. With the tone editor, the user can alter the darkness of an illustration, and that was what the illustration looked like at that stage. The user can also edit the directions along which the pen strokes are placed by painting directions onto the tone image. The state of the direction component is displayed both by hue and by a grid of direction indicators spread over the illustration. We will now specify the directions needed for this paintbrush illustration. We start by painting directions for the bristles of the brush. We accomplish this in 2 stages. First, we establish the overall directions of the bristles with a region filling tool, and then we give the bristles more character and visual interest by going over them with a comb tool. We use a coarse comb in the middle of the brush and a fine comb at the tips of the bristles. For the handle of the brush, we use a region filling tool that fills in the area between user-drawn curves with directions interpolating those curves. This tool allows us to paint along cross-sections of the handle to indicate its curvature. To complete the illustration, we use region filling tools again to fill in the middle of the brush. Here's our finished illustration of a paintbrush, and here are some other illustrations we've created with this system.
In this video, we demonstrate a new technique for creating non-photorealistic renderings of 3D models at interactive frame rates. We first show a traditional rendering of a model of a torso. On the right, we demonstrate the same model rendered by our system. The accompanying paper describes a fast algorithm for producing a visible line description of a scene. Our system renders these lines in a variety of expressive styles as shown here. Because the rendered lines do not correspond directly to the geometry of the 3D model, we cannot use z-buffering to determine visibility. An extension of the algorithm allows us to determine visible surface regions as well. With this information, our renderings can include shading strokes to better convey the 3D shape of the object. The resulting effect is quite different from traditional rendering. Before demonstrating our system further, we briefly mention two more traditional applications for the visible line algorithm. Here we see a version of the torso model containing over 90,000 triangles. With this many triangles, hardware z-buffering on our test machine yields a poor frame rate, making it awkward to manipulate the model. A common approach used in this situation is to switch to rendering just the bounding box of the object during manipulation. Our visible line algorithm provides an alternative solution which yields more informative images while maintaining an acceptable frame rate. The second application is to produce renderings of 3D models in which hidden lines are shown. On the right, we use our system to render hidden lines of an object in a style which corresponds to the number of layers of surface occluding each line. In contrast, the traditional wireframe rendering on the left is visually cluttered by the great number of edges shown. Now we demonstrate a variety of rendering styles produced by our system. We begin with simple line renderings of the mechanical part model. In each frame, our system first finds the silhouette edges of the polyhedral model. Other edges may be considered as well, such as those which correspond to sharp creases. Next, the visible portions of the silhouette and crease edges are determined. Finally, the visible edges are projected to screen space where they form polylines. The polylines are rendered in expressive styles by means of displacement maps applied to the lines, as described in the accompanying paper. For this landscape model, we render the lines using the texture map technique described in the paper. Finally, we demonstrate several rendering styles which include shading strokes. The system tentatively assigns one shading stroke per triangle of the polyhedral model. It draws a stroke if it lies on a visible portion of surface and if the computed gray value there exceeds a given threshold. The strokes are then rendered in any of the expressive styles shown previously. Our technique for placing shading strokes gives good results when the size of triangles in screen space is not too big or too small, as shown here. An important area for future work is to develop fast, flexible methods for placing shading strokes, which maintain a target density of strokes in screen space without regard to the screen space resolution of the triangles themselves.
We present a model for simulating the visual effects of watercolor. As a major part of these effects is the way they change over time, we've chosen to show this time-lapse animation. Here we see a wet brushstroke on dry paper with darkening at the edges. Here's a nearly dry brushstroke revealing the paper's texture. Here's a stroke of wet paint on wet paper, and a stroke of clear water on a still wet wash. This is a backrun, which is a puddle of water spreading back into a damp area as it dries. This is an example of different pigments spreading at different speeds, and the difference between over and under. The automatic painting planner lets to paint a target image in just a few glazes using mats painted by the user, a choice of pigments, and a few parameters. Once mats are drawn and the pigments are chosen, the painting process is entirely automatic. Here we see the entire painting in process, with the glazes being painted one at a time. The small jumps are the planner's attempts to correct areas that are too light by adding drops of pigment, and areas that are too dark by adding drops of water. The highlights are created by blotting away paint at the end of the glaze.
At the Johnson Space Center, virtual environments have been and are being used to train astronauts, flight controllers, and a wide range of mission support personnel. For some time, NASA scientists have worked to transfer virtual reality technology to operational training applications. These applications are a cost-effective way to put trainees in their task environment and let them work with the hardware to be used in the actual operation. Here are two examples. A virtual environment was created to train NASA personnel for repair of the Hubble Space Telescope. In this example, a spacewalk to switch out the wide-field planetary camera. Engineering drawings were used in the design so that each piece of hardware appears to scale and in the proper location relative to the other hardware. The laser pointer projecting from the finger is used to select objects for activation, and the flashing green light leads the trainee to the next area of activity. In this next best thing to the real task environment, the trainee learns the appearance and location of the hardware and to move through the numerous steps of the process in the proper order. As the trainee becomes more skilled, faults or problems can be incorporated into the simulation, challenging him or her to discover what's wrong, leading to the implementation of corrective action. The VETL used the groundwork of this Hubble Space Telescope service program to develop a next step in the use of virtual environments, a training session involving two people in different locations.
Now, is it you?
Yeah, Wolf, how you doing?
Well, so far so good.
How's the weather in Germany?
As usual, raining.
In this case, astronaut Bernard Harris, the Johnson Space Center, took his seat in a chair equipped with hand controllers and donned a virtual reality glove and head-mounted display, while European Space Agency astronaut Merbold used a similar arrangement at Fraunhofer Institute for Computer Graphics in Darmstadt, Germany. These two astronauts shared a virtual environment to practice changing out the Hubble's solar array drive electronics modules. Seen here from his point of view, Merbold begins by removing the old module from the Hubble Space Telescope, already docked to the Space Shuttle. As he looks down to the forward part of the cargo bay, he spots Harris, who has removed the new module from its carrier. Harris and Merbold maneuver to the proper location, and they exchange hardware.
Slowly, man. You're on the way to the moon.
Oh.
Yeah, Bernard.
Yeah, can you see me coming to you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
As Harris returns the old module to the carrier, Merbold translates back to the Hubble to install the new unit.
Hope I'll let you do that, and then back away, and then I'll go after yours.
Okay.
In this test, each astronaut was able to see what the other was doing and to speak directly to one another about the task they were performing. In addition, they discussed the strengths and weaknesses of this long-distance training method.
Ulf, have you done much of this training?
Never ever. I have had a little bit of training just before we started this this session this afternoon. But I think, okay, many people, probably my son, they are definitely better than I am.
After more than 30 minutes on the job, mission accomplished, the two bid farewell. The lab is also developing applications of virtual reality for industry, using virtual environments to transform data into a reality that a person can experience offers new and meaningful potential to advance medical research, including the investigation of the structure of viruses and the makeup proteins and inhibitors, so-called designer drugs. This evolving technology provides a powerful mechanism to identify subtle patterns in data, patterns which may lead to important new discoveries. Virtual environments are also being developed for the oil and gas industry, both in the search for new supplies of hydrocarbon-based fuels and in the efficient extraction of those materials. Immersive, multi-sensory displays provide users with freedom from distraction while engaging more of their senses, thus assisting industry in making new discoveries and improving productivity. virtual reality is much more than fun and games. Using virtual environments for training means that training can occur anywhere the computer hardware and software exist, and even in more than one location simultaneously, allowing a number of people to train or work together in a world they share. With the properly constructed virtual environment, trainees have the advantage of practicing a task in the real task environment. And as the development of virtual environments advances, the cost of building each new world is reduced, lowering the overall cost of training. But virtual environments cover more ground than training NASA's skilled workforce. They can facilitate and enhance the education of those who haven't yet learned the laws of science. Prepare the scientists of the future is another way virtual environment training helps assure advances in science, on Earth as well as in space, and improves our lives.